Recording now. Welcome to everyone. Thanks everyone for joining us. Today we're in the webinar series number 2 for the Future Ready Schools, where we're going to talk about mastering information management and governance in K-12 education. Today is, as I said, the second webinar in the series. Last week we went over data and unlocking the potential and power of data for K-12. Next week we'll talk about AI and are you AI ready when it comes to your initiatives for 2025 as well. Joining me today on this webinar will be Mark Sheehan from Antari Solutions, who is our modern work and information management SME. I am Greg Brown. I look after client relationships and partnerships, especially in that education space as well. Debate graduate from University of New England as well, so teaching is a near and dear thing to my heart, primary school teaching especially as well. And also joining me from Microsoft is Peter Manoukian. I'll let Peter introduce himself in more detail as well.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for all of you who are joining us for the first time. But if you're coming back for the second series of a 3-part webinar series, also thank you for joining us again. And my name's Peter Manoukian. I'm the Azure Education Lead across Australia and New Zealand. And I'm really excited to be sharing some recent trends, observations as well across the education. A number of schools we've been talking to, a lot of great progress, and hopefully we can share with you some real life stories as well that we've been, I guess, fortunate enough to be working with a number of schools across the sector. Before we kick off, I just wanted to take a moment to share with you Microsoft Education's team mission, and that is to empower every learner, educator, and institution to achieve more. And it's very much grounded in a people-centric goal, and that's enabled by technology. And we want to use the power of data, AI, and analytics to make a difference to individuals and communities with a diverse range of skills, cultures, and backgrounds. And we truly believe this mission is especially important in education as we teach the leaders and citizens of tomorrow. So in talking to a number of schools, and we do talk to a very large number of schools across not just Australia, but also in New Zealand as well, we're observing that data is indeed the fuel that really powers every school. And with the shift to hybrid learning and an increase in digital transformation, school data is often now living outside the traditional boundaries of what we used to see. And this is outside the campus and outside the school networks as well. And this rapid evolution is really resulting in data management becoming more and more complex. So education institutions have always needed to maintain that visibility into their data estate. So managing and protecting it effectively is of critical importance. This also includes understanding where data is stored and who has permission to access the data and how it's being used across various devices. So data governance becomes that unifying glue that ties everything together and manages your analytics plus reporting workloads as well. So it's that same data governance that's going to translate your data strategy into data rules and policies that enable your school to operate securely and safely. So why is data governance such an important consideration for so many schools? Well, finding a data governance solution that integrates with hybrid environments has traditionally been challenging, but this is absolutely necessary in order to manage data effectively and keep student and staff data safe. Most schools I speak to are often asking for an integrated solution that can help govern, protect, and manage the school's data estate. And the majority of schools, typically, the solution that can help govern and protect and manage that school data estate is one of the biggest challenges would be around dark data. So when I think about dark data, it's referring to information that organizations collect, and they process and they store during their regular school operations, but often fail to repurpose the use of that same data. So in a school setting, this can take various forms and may include both physical and digital records. And this can have significant impacts. An example of this is where a school might include student behavioural records, and it often collects detailed records on disciplinary actions, attendance of a particular student, and it also might include records relating to participation in extracurricular activities. So these records might be stored in various databases, but not analysed or used to improve student outcome. So the impact of dark data is really a missed opportunity for intervention. And without analysing behavioural data, schools might in fact miss patterns indicating students at risk of academic failure or potentially other social issues. But more importantly, early intervention programs that could have been developed if this data was utilised more effectively. I'll just build this slide out. So achieving sound data governance practice and controls across an entire school remains high on the agenda of every school I speak to on a daily basis. And especially given the realities of data today, the sheer volume, the variety of different types of data, and the velocity of the data, so the speed, which does often fluctuate between large batch uploads to streaming data, are all accelerating dramatically. And the complexity of creating an enterprise knowledge graph across an entire school can really seem overwhelming. So today we generate data far faster than what we are able to understand it. So as we start to explore the next sections of this morning's presentation, ask yourself some of these questions. What data does my school own? Is the data trustworthy? Are the right people getting access to the data and in a timely manner? And are we managing data in a compliant way? So in the next sections, I'll hand over now to Greg and Mark to walk us through some of the existing technologies that help simplify the task of data governance and also share some relevant use cases that we've been fortunate enough to be helping other schools across Australia and New Zealand. Thanks, Greg. Might hand over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. And very, very good introduction, and also some very, very good outlines around what we need to consider. And nothing comes more home to rest than when we see the findings from the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse and the highlights that it found in terms of the importance of information management within institutions, particularly within schools, to prevent child abuse and also to keep our children safe as well in those institutions as well. So, we know our schools are trusted with the care and education of our most precious resources, being our children, and we know that there are significant challenges around keeping that data both available and well maintained and well catalogued and classified as well. And that student information, particularly when it comes to ensuring we adhere to those sort of requirements going forward, is important, given that, what's at its heart is that ability to understand where does our dark data sit and can we uncover it and actually put it together to bring forth a set of robust information management systems. And that allows us to make sure that we can centralise and access that data. The journey to effective information management really comes with that strong focus on understanding it's continuous. It's not a point-in-time solution. It needs to be ongoing. There is a life cycle to this, and that requires planning, implementation, ongoing adaptation for the needs of the organisation, as well as adhering to different regulations and those sort of changes that we see upstream that come down to us as schools, as well as understanding how best to use technology as it evolves as well in the landscape to meet the organisational needs. And just as we've seen the rate of pace of change of technology in the last 1, 2, 3 years, we're seeing also changes coming out of legislation around social media and access now at the moment in the publicity and press around restricting access to things like TikTok for children under 16. We need to understand as well ourselves how best to take those tools forward and evolve that in a way that keeps that current, but also keeps us safeguarded and makes sure that our students are safe, we have the information we need, and we're also then giving our parents, our teachers, and everyone else around our organisations peace of mind that we've got the right structure. That comes back to a holistic journey, as I mentioned, around that life cycle. And for us, that information management life cycle is key. We talk about everything from creation to destruction, and that's an important one. We know we're going to create lots and lots of data. We know we're going to have permission slips, we're going to have incident reports, case management notes, we're going to have counsellor notes, we're going to have academic achievement reports, we're going to have PAT test results. We're going to have so many bits of data that are created, and we have so many bits of data as well that's still paper-based, permission notes which are handwritten, signed, and those sorts of aspects. We know that we need to get those bits of data and classify and store them well and make sure that they are accessible by the right people. To Peter's point earlier, we do not provide access to the wrong people, the wrong data. We need to make sure that we have that right storage location and we understand what those assets are when we do store them. And then it comes back to making sure that the right people use that data in a way that supports problem solving, decision making, drives the right insight, and also goes a long way to providing strong environmental posture and a strong risk management posture to make sure our children are safe, the outcomes are achieved. And then we also look at, once we've used that and our students have moved on and they've gone on to other tertiary endeavours or pursuits, or maybe they've gone on to vocational jobs, are we at the right time to understand what gets archived and when? Do we know when that happens and what needs to happen when we don't need it anymore? Are we archiving it? Or are we moving to the last part of that lifecycle management and going, we're going to now look at destruction of those records safely? And what is safe destruction, and how do we know we've safely destroyed that record in a way that is compliant and that we don't have to worry that, that record may come up and resurface somewhere else when it shouldn't have? So there's a whole process here that we look at when it comes to information lifecycle that schools in that K-12 space need to think about. It does seem quite daunting, but it doesn't need to be considered so scary. What I will do is hand over to Mark now from the team and Antares, who's going to talk to you about real world implementations, how schools have gone through this. So over to you, Mark, and give us a little more of an insight from the ground level.
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg. So what I wanted to talk to you guys today, Peter and Greg have definitely touched on what we already know are some of the information challenges that we have as a school, as an organisation. We need to know where our information lives. Are we storing it correctly? If the right people have access, and we're disposing of it, as Greg mentioned before. Our users, our staff, our educators, they're not document controllers. We don't want them to be document controllers. We want them to be doing their day-to-day work and letting the systems do as much as possible of handling the issues or the information that we have, so that it's easy for the users to get access to them, for our educators to find what they need and upload or create what they need in a manner that is safe without them having to consider too much of what they need to be doing. Some issues we've had, very specific ones that we've seen in the past from other schools and organisations, is students finding documents that they probably shouldn't have been privy to, protected information being classified or confidential data being stored in the same location as something that's publicly or generally accessible, and then also the disposal schedule or the retention schedule, and having that if somebody has the ability to see a document, they also have the ability to delete that document or potentially attach that to an email to be sent out to inside or even external to the school or organisation. So here there's some real world examples of issues we've seen in the past where the information management structure wasn't put in place, the information architecture wasn't created in a way that allowed people to get the access to the data they need while still limiting what they can do with that in certain instances. One of the common scenarios that I want to dive deeper into today, however, is the conversion of physical paper-based records into digital records. I imagine that this is a scenario that's not unfamiliar with you all, but there is a room or a big box or area somewhere within the building that is entirely dedicated to paper and boxes of paper and shelves of boxes of paper and rooms of shelves of boxes of paper. So one person knows how to access them. One person has a spreadsheet somewhere that aligns where those all live. But we're likely to have something that's quite confidential as medical records combined with something that might be teacher notes or exam results. So the confidentiality within even the single box or a single file within a box may be different to what, each file might be different. So trying to digitize those, is key to making sure that the right documents are living in the right location, have the right retention schedules, disposal schedules, information. So with that in mind, the first step for organisations is making sure the right foundation is in place. So key around what governance we're going to put around our information. What tools are we using in what instances? What are the roles and responsibilities for those that have access or who administer and govern the tools? And what are the policies around not only how you manage your Microsoft 365, but also the other tools related to that and the information itself. And then finally, putting a key or a structured information architecture in place allows us to know where the documents are meant to live, where the information should live, what rules and policies we put in place around that information, making sure that we're managing it in a structured and supported way. So with that in mind, I'd like to dive into a little bit of video that we've put together. This is using the same scenario around the creation or the digitisation of these. So what we're going to show you in the next video is how we're going to develop and train AI scanning models based on your scanned content into SharePoint Online that will then be able to tag the documents and manage that information architecture or management for the organisation. So we're not asking our users to do it. We're not hiring 3 or 4 document controllers to sit in a room together and tag documents and set rules and make sure the permissions are all correct. While of need for input from the organisation, allowing the systems to do the grunt work for you is quite key to making sure that foundation is in place. And then the added benefit of your document controllers really comes into play, where they can cover those rules, create those policies, etc. To reset the scene, what I wanted to show you guys here is our demo environment where we're going to create a model for tagging our documents that we're going to bring in from our scanned physical documents. And what we need to do, show you how simple it is to create that model that will then allow us to pull out the information that we need from our documents. So diving into an example syntax model, there's 4 key actions that come up as part of the creation of this. One is the adding of sample files. We only really need 5, but the more we can include, the better. We then go through and classify the files, which ones are and aren't related to what we're trying to do. We put in place the rules around what we want to extract from them, and then we apply them to different areas. So in this instance, we're extracting manufacturer and content type from this particular type of documents, and we're applying it on a few of these sites. When we dive in to look at the training of them, you'll see the same document we had up before with images and a lot of different rich text has been OCR down to purely just the content within that document. That then allows us to tell the model where the information that we're trying to pull out exists, what type of information we're trying to get out of it, and what we don't want to see. So this allows the model to know not only what we're trying to pull out, but which documents are and aren't relevant to that particular type of document. So you see in a very quick minute, that's the process around implementing the model. But now what we want to see is how we're going to tag that information. So how do we tag our documents that we have brought into the system? What we're going to do to pull that, extract that information out. Brilliant. So here we are with the auto tagging. So here's our demo environment. It's our information and document management site. What we're going to do is drag in a heap of documents that we have digitized or scanned from external that we have on another machine directly into a drop-off library. So this is just one location where we're putting all of our documents allowing the model to run across it and extract what it can and tell us what we need to get from this. We can automatically bring those scanned documents in during the digitisation process, but what you'll see is the model has run across these documents, and where relevant, it's been able to determine what of these are user manuals, which manufacturer they come from, and a confidence score relating to those. So you see, these are real documents that we've pulled from manufacturers. These have not been created by us, or they're not text documents. These are real living, breathing documents that we've been able to pull this information from. You'll see that not only do we get the metadata, but we also get a status to let us know if it's finished or failed, and a confidence score. So using the confidence score and the status, we can determine, okay, great, we want to send this on to somebody else. If it's maybe under 95%, we want a document controller to double check the tagging. But anything over 95%, we might be comfortable that this is correct. And what we can then do is use the metadata, the content type, or the manufacturer, or anything else we've been able to extract to handle that document in a way that makes sense to our information architecture and our rules that we've put in place. So we can move that off to a confidential location. We can move that into a more open location in certain instances. A user manual, something we probably want everyone to see. If we pull out that it is medical reports, we might want to take that away from our, lower or increase the security around that. So that then allows us to put the document where it lives outside of this drop-off library, tag it accordingly, put the permissions, rules, policies in place around that. And that's all done using the Microsoft stack. We don't need to, have a lot of manual input there. We don't need a lot of users or going in controllers checking what we need to see and making the changes based on what they understand of the tools, or the documents rather. Beautiful. Just bringing back the PowerPoint slide and finding where we were. So now that we have our information, it's being tagged, we need to make sure we're managing it accordingly. So you've seen leveraging the AI to scan our documents, applying metadata, etc. We can then use Power Automate as part of the Microsoft stack to move that content around, manage the permissions, put some further security on top of that. Purview sits over the top to do the classification and the sensitivity on our documents based on what syntax or the AI was able to extract from that document. It can then apply the right retention label, so we know that those retention and disposal schedules have been maintained. As part of the SharePoint Premium tools, we also have backup and archive that allows us to back up our SharePoint documents, our Teams, our OneDrive documents, which allows us to then restore that in the future. If something goes wrong, we need to get a point in time of a certain record. We have the ability to do all of that backup and archiving within the tool. We also have the ability for content review, making sure that if something is about to be destroyed, somebody is approving that or confirming that this is okay. There might be reasons to keep something a little bit longer than the retention schedule due to an audit or litigation or whatnot. So having that ability to review the rules and policies on specific pieces of content is really quite valuable and gives us that control. But now that we have the information in there, it's being managed, we're happy that it's accessible by the right users. How are we going to use that data? So we now know that because we've got a good information architecture, we have a single source of truth. We've deduplicated our documents, which is obviously a lot of cost optimization. We have it is digital instead of physical. So the real estate that they were taking up, the physical real estate, is no longer something that we need to pay for. And we have better access for legal and regulatory matters. We can also use tools such as AI to extract information from the document. So this video that does seem to be working, excellent news, is able to look at our documents. We can ask questions based on the content of the document and really extract information. So our educators, our users, our staff are able to ask questions and utilise that information in a much better way than they could possibly think to do if it was locked in a room 2 stories up that they need to go through 3 levels of approval to get access to. So it's really quite the ability to make that dark data no longer dark is really quite valuable once we have it all where it needs to be. Then obviously once the usage of our data, we get to the point where we need to archive or dispose. So making sure that we're archiving our documents in a a low-cost environment, improves our storage costs. It makes the searchability and the findability of documents more a nicer experience for our users. We don't want them to be able to search for archived documents. They don't want to see information that is no longer relevant. So being able to take away that metadata, those versions, that information that they no longer need access to on a day-to-day basis, makes the search more powerful, makes the discovery more powerful for our users, and reduces storage costs, which is always a nice thing to have. And then finally, looking at disposal of our documents. We obviously need to dispose of documents as they come to end of life. Generally, the current standard across a lot of organisations that we work with, schools in particular, is that we do have some documents that need to be kept forever. We don't have a way to easily classify which ones do and don't fall under that rule. And so it becomes the fact that everything is kept forever simply because we can't risk deleting something that may need to be maintained for a longer period of time. But having the right information management in place, the right governance, the right policies, we can safely dispose of things that we know we no longer need, reducing the risk of anything being accidentally shared, or purposely shared if we're looking at something malicious. It also takes that away so we don't have to manage content that we no longer need access to. And obviously the outcome or the end result of all of these steps and the process and the life cycle is that we now have much better usable information. We only see usable information and not anything that's no longer relevant. We're aligned to regulatory compliance, so we're following the right rules and the right policies that are in place for our information. And we're AI ready, which as a user-based information or public-based things such as ChatGPT are becoming more readily available and more used. Our users, our staff are going to want to start using that AI functionality in-house as well as external. So allowing us to have AI over our document, but have it still managed by us, controlled by us, the security controlled by us, is really quite valuable for the organisation. So that covers through the information lifecycle, and I might throw back to Greg to talk about where we go to from here.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. That's the natural sort of question when we start to look at where as a organisation should I go? How do I address some of the challenges that we have, and what's the logical starting point? So what I'll go through is a few different common scenarios that a lot of our customers, our schools have worked through from different angles for different reasons. Naturally, we all know as educators sometimes we're tasked with some challenges around. We don't have a lot of people. We have some issues with competing priorities. But knowing how important information and management is, and also document management is, as well as ensuring the outcomes of our children, both in terms of safety and educational outcomes, there are many different ways to start. So we'll step through the most logical ones that we see. And in terms of the foundations assessment when it comes to modern collaboration, this is one where a lot of customers look at in terms of understanding. I'll just load this up. Understanding how best to use collaboration and ensure that we have a strong foundation for collaboration within our digital landscape. And it is important when we start to think about collaboration from the context of we share information out to parents, we share information out to students, we sometimes use Teams as an LMS, we use other tools within the environment. Are we collaborating, to Mark's point earlier, with the right documentation to the right people who have the right access to see that document? Or are we sharing things out potentially to channels, to areas that we shouldn't be as well? So making sure that we understand our ways of working when it comes to collaboration is important as an organisation when it comes to delivering educational outcomes and keeping everyone safe and empowering our teachers to do more as well. So that's an area where we see a lot of schools thinking about, well, we want to know that we're doing the right things when it comes to our collaboration. The next one is around the governance for M365, and Peter touched on this earlier. I think things around purview and understanding where our information sits and understanding what's in our landscape, but also do we understand what are the right controls, processes, policies, governance procedures to put in place from day one? What are the responsibilities? Who owns what? Who has that control over that? How do we reduce that risk threat surface at that area for our data to make sure that we're adhering to best practice policies and we're well aligned from a framework when it comes to Microsoft tooling as well? So that's another one where a lot of schools are very interested in making sure that we've made the investment in Microsoft technology. It's a great, powerful suite. Are we implementing it in the best ways? And can we do more with it to protect our students, our parents, our teachers, and deliver the right outcomes? So this is another area where we see a lot of interest from. The classification piece is important. Both Mark and Peter have touched on this around being able to understand what are those documents. Do we have the right documents and policies for classifying documents? Do we know that we've got policy to handle medical records versus other documents, and we have separated them out and start to look at understanding how to catalogue and then classify? A lot of schools have a lot of documentation living in different areas, different versions of documentation. We see, we might have 3 versions of the same document. Which one is the right document to use? Which is the latest? So being able to go through it and do that classification, understand, identify, tag, and put those sensitivity labels as well around that to make sure that we secure and are also able to report on where sensitive documentation may be exposed, so we can quickly close and resolve that at its utmost. It's another one where we see a lot of schools really getting focused in on. And lastly but not least is around the art of the possible when it comes to AI. We understand there's a lot of tooling, there's a lot of interest. Parents and teachers are really driving us for better outcomes, better tooling. We know AI is built in so many different products we use in our normal day-to-day life. So the natural pressure comes on us as educational organisations to go, well, we need to implement some form of AI. We'll either want to give it to our teachers, we want our students to use it safely, we actually want to endorse students using it and give them the right to use it for actually potential use cases where we may see we want to give them tests. We want them to actually leverage the tool to help them with creative writing or help educational outcomes. And done right and done transparently, it can be a great tool for enabling better outcomes for educators. It can be a great tool for parents wanting to understand how best to help their children through a course as well. So for this one, we look at the AI now of what's possible when it comes to a particular use case a school or organisation might have, and work backwards from there to understand, from that use case, how does the existing policies and governance set up? How is your document lifecycle all the way back through to, do we have the right documents tagged, classified and secured, that we know that if we implement this particular use case, we will be safe, we will not be showing or sharing anything, and that some student, to Mark's point earlier, will not get access to some sort of information they shouldn't have. Parents will not see other students' records, those sort of things. So this one really comes at it from a very specific use case angle where we think, and we work backwards around what does your landscape look like to facilitate and deliver that use case, and what remediation steps need to happen in order to get that going as well. So I've touched on a few things there in terms of how you go forward and how schools should look at that. What I will do now is I'll just pause because we've touched on a lot of content, and I'll pause there for a minute to see if there's any questions anyone might have around the content we've shared. Well, obviously, we've got everyone on the call here, and we've got Peter and Mark here to answer any questions that may be there. And while we wait for any questions to come up, maybe I'll throw to Mark, first of all, with a question from myself in terms of what you've gone through. What are some of the common challenges and scenarios that you see when it comes to implementing, safe, effective document management and governance controls? What were some of the real use cases? I know you touched on a box full of records. What are some of the other things that you've come across? And let's not name and shame anyone, but what are some of those scenarios that we see, that are often, challenges for schools, and where this particular solution and SharePoint Premium and the tools can come to a good effect?
Yeah, I think one of the key scenarios is that when schools look at starting down this journey, they realise it's quite a resource-intensive journey, and that can be a real blocker if they feel that they do need to hire, 3 to 4 people to manage the tagging, the scanning of all the documents. And while the tools don't take all of that away, there's certainly an element of automation that can be taken away on going through every document and tagging them. That's obviously a key big scenario that the tools can handle. And then there's a lot less input from users. There's also some, I guess, in a lot of instances, organisations simply not knowing what's available for the tools. So not knowing how to best utilise the tools, or not knowing what's available, and therefore seeing it as a much bigger job than it potentially needs to be. So once we have the tools in place, the people involved understand them, the decision makers have got the tools, then they are much more likely to see it as a journey that is accessible and achievable, rather than something that is a massive hurdle to overcome.
Perfect. No, thank you, Mark. That's good insight as well. And I might ask Peter a question now, actually, and we'll we'll get Peter on camera as well, get him front and center as well. And then when it comes to the Microsoft technology stack, Peter, and your role across ANZ, which you see a lot of different initiatives being across both Australia and New Zealand, that region. I know there's a lot of different schools of thought, but Microsoft technology suite is becoming very much front and center for a lot of schools looking to embrace the product suite for replacing different legacy systems. What are you seeing from the market in terms of SIMs or student information modules and LMSs and these things, and how that comes together to create one ecosystem that is safe, secure under that umbrella?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg, and it is probably the most common topic of conversation when we're meeting with schools. And I would say simplification is probably the theme that I hear most across. You mentioned a number of those critical school systems, whether it be LMS or the student information system, and other critical applications and systems that the school uses. It's about how do we better integrate? How do we better surface the data? How do we better draw insights as well? And very quickly, what we tend to see is the conversation evolves and sometimes even starts at, well, what we would like to ideally do is have a unified data estate across all these disparate systems. And often what we're dealing with is data silos. So there's an opportunity, and quite often the governance conversation kind of spawns from a broader data conversation. And how do we better integrate and leverage some of these assets that we use across the entire school? So I would say that the two are intrinsically tied together. They're not separate conversations that often happen. And the governance conversation is an interesting one, because what we tend to see is often it also spawns out of discrete use case scenarios. And by that, what I mean is it might be a particular AI, student tutor, which is an agent that a particular school might be developing. So that might become the source of where governance starts to get unpacked. And are we essentially surfacing the right information for that student at the right time? So is it contextualized? And then am I able to deliver a more personalized learning experience for that student? So that, again, tying back to the broader ecosystem and thinking about things like security controls and identity management. So the conversation again starts to really focus in on who am I dealing with, thinking about their Entra ID, thinking about role-based access controls, and then what individual files would that individual have access to, and only giving visibility to those files. So you can start to see how these scenarios very quickly start to unpack. Our advice is always start small. Don't try and boil the ocean. Really start with the use cases that are most impactful, that are most relevant for your school, but also try and start somewhere where there's relatively lower complexity and lower risk as well. So you can identify a use case and a target audience that you work closely with, and start to roll out some of these new capabilities.
Yeah, no, perfect. I think that's very, very sound advice, and it's the way we see a lot of schools going down that path around the safe journey and transition over time, but making sure each step of the way the guardrails are in place, the policies, the foundations, and as they sort of step through that change to adopting Teams as an LMS or D365 as a SIM system, everything is done with a careful, cautious approach, but also mindful of delivering value back to the school as well, and to the parents, the teachers as well. So I think that sort of resonates what we're hearing as well, and it's good that that's sort of being reflected as well across your conversations across Australia and New Zealand as well. And probably now to Mark as well, whilst we talk about document management and classification information management, and to Peter's point around LMSs and those things, and we use Teams, how do we make sure that we control those collaboration channels as well? Because tagging documentation is one thing, classifying and making it secure, but then we're going to invite students to a Teams channel because we've got a class who are learning, using Teams as a channel. So how does that sort of play out in terms of oversight, governance, policies, those things?
Yeah, absolutely. We always say that it's key to get your governance and structure to the point, making sure that foundation is in place, that your governance has not just looked at your information governance only, but the system governance and the application governance. So who controls what are people allowed to do, making sure that there are teams that are open for students and teams that are closed to students, how we make sure that's managed from a security perspective, from a process perspective, and then making sure the right roles and responsibilities are in place so that somebody has the control over the system, that knows that they own that system, or can create those rules around security and policy, and the right groups are in place. So yeah, having that foundation is really quite key, and the governance and information architecture go hand in hand. So we know what your structure looks like from a more technical perspective, and then we know what the rules are around how that comes together. So people can work in a place that is safe. They know that where they're here, this is what they're working on and how they can use that data and what they can't do. And then over here, this is what they can do, which is a little bit more open or a little bit more closed based on the rules. So yeah, having that structure in place, that foundation, is really quite key to, opening all the functionality and the controls while still keeping, that management and that oversight on what's going on with your data.
Perfect. No, that's very good. I think that's good advice for everyone when it comes to understanding exactly how, we look at that extension of, because as we talk about classification and shared by premium and having a centralized document repository and information more secured and tagged, we need to understand the challenges around propagating it out to the right channels to make sure the right people have access. And I think then there's probably going to be another segue then to question back to you, Peter, as well, because I know that we have the option, when we discussed last week's webinar around data and AI and unlocking the power of data for K-12. Next week, we're going to talk about AI. We have the option as well in NM365 stack to understand metrics using things like Graph API. So, what are the sort of insights that we could get out of that when it comes to knowing what's been accessed, but also knowing what data could potentially help us deliver better student outcomes from that engagement side of things.
Yeah, and this is one of the benefits, I think, and probably the most exciting part of what we're talking about here today. It's really about not just the insights and the controls that we're able to implement, but drawing feedback. So think about all the data that's being generated across all these systems that we've talked about today, whether it be the LMS, whether it be some schools are steering towards Teams as a collaborative platform, student information system. So all those sources of data and the potential to introduce AI as part of the workflow in the everyday learning of a student. So there's a number of potential use cases we see emerging, and it's not just an API management interaction we see anymore. It's really along that continuum of learning workflow for every student and for every teacher. So as more collaboration starts to occur, as more consumption of the data starts to emerge, that data ecosystem and the insights we can draw as an organization, schools get to get a really rich view of who's accessing what data for which classes, and then correlating that back to academic outcomes. So where are we starting to see academic performance improvements and starting to measure where we're having step change? And this is where the really exciting progress starts to happen. And then feeding those triggers back into how we develop classes and deliver content as part of learning. So I'm not just understanding which content is relevant, but in what format it's being delivered and to whom it's being delivered and at what level as well. So really starting to uncover more effective measures of delivering teaching as well. I think that's where the real excitement happens, and being able to tailor and make more personalized learning experience for every student.
It's very much a holistic journey of starting with classification and then understanding our documents and removing the dark silos and those dark documents and bringing them into the light, surfacing them up to the right people, seeing how that's being used effectively by the best, seeing where those that potentially could be using that document and information better, and then understanding how to use AI to help us get the better use of that going forward as well. And we can correlate that back to learning outcomes, student behaviours, and improved, teacher effectiveness as well, which is always the old adage, how do we do more with less, right? Teachers are always under pressure. This is one area where we can see that holistically, that journey, where we look at that collaboration productivity space from document and information management right through to here's that outcomes, we're AI enabled, we're empowering our educators, we're empowering our students, and we're delivering better outcomes overall. So do I do a fair summation of what you just said? I think that's probably, as you say, very exciting, but it all starts with that fundamental sort of foundations being in place as well. Perfect. So look, there's no questions from anyone else, so I will just give everyone a bit of a reminder that the next webinar is coming up next week. For those on the line that haven't registered, please register now. That's the webinar 3, Enhancing AI in K-12 Schools. That one is open for registrations. The webinar from last week, which was Unlocking the Power of Data Analytics in K-12 Schools, is available online. Feel free to go back and have a look at that one. That was really interesting in terms of how do we start to drive student outcomes and look at the data that's available in our schools and tools like Microsoft Fabric to help deliver better, meaningful reports and information to our educators, to our students, to help them understand, where to from here in terms of accelerating their learning outcome journey. Today's webinar, which is all about information management and governance in K-12, will be available online shortly, and you'll get a notification about that. So I will, without any further ado, thank you all for joining us today. It's been great. I hope we see you all next week's session as well. And feel free to reach out to us if there are any questions as well offline as well. Actually, question? No, it's already hand raised.